Welcome to Perspective and Potential, where we explore thoughtful ways to navigate life, strengthen families, and grow into who we're becoming. I'm Abigail Straight, joined by my co-host and mother, Gwen Fund. Together, we explore ideas and stories through honest conversations about personal growth, faith, and the everyday choices that shape our lives, inviting you to grow, shift your perspective, and step more fully into who you're becoming. If you'd like to learn more about us, you can check us out at perspectiveandpotential.com. Thanks for joining us. Let's dive in and see where a new perspective might take you. Joseph's story is likely one of those that we've all heard since we were little. The coat of many colors, brothers are jealous, Egypt, famine, reunion. And it can be easy to remember the highlights and yet miss what's underneath. Because when you slow it down, this wasn't just a hard chapter in his life. It was years of being misunderstood, years of waiting, years where doing the right thing didn't immediately pay off. And I think that's what makes this story so relevant. Most of us aren't going to live through something as dramatic as Joseph did, because most of us won't be sold into slavery by our siblings, but we will face disappointment. We will experience unfairness. We will feel misunderstood. And at some point, we will have to decide whether pain gets the final say in shaping us. And Joseph's story forces that question. So today we're asking, what allowed Joseph to remain steady? Why is forgiveness so hard when the hurt is so real? And what role does humility play in healing? So, Mom, when you studied Joseph through the lens of identity and spiritual strength, what stands out to you most?
Well, most of us complain about a bad day, but this guy, he could have complained about a bad life, right? His brothers hated him. They mistreated him, and they sold him into slavery. And then he was lied about and thrown into prison for a crime he didn't even commit. And while in prison, people broke their promises that they had made to him. I've worked with a lot of trauma people who couldn't even match that list. And yet, those experiences, in the end, didn't define him or make him bitter. Um, and at the very end, when his family had to turn to him for help, um, he had it within himself to forgive them. So I think we can learn a lot from Joseph if we take a really deep look into who he was through the context of his story. Now, first, he was evidently a very trustworthy person because if we look at the story, his father, Potiphar, this jailer, and even Pharaoh, all of these men gave him positions of trust. Next, from the story, we can see he was a man of integrity because he refused to be tempted by Potiphar's wife. And lastly, we can also see that he must have been in tune with the Spirit of God, and that's evidenced by his being able to interpret Pharaoh's dream and know how to guide them through the coming famine. So when you put all these characteristics together, we can assume a pretty high level of intelligence and righteousness in him. So the broken trust that he experienced were really monumental, life-shattering. And the physical and emotional suffering had to be challenging as it went on for all that long time. But I personally believe that it was his spiritual connection that helped him keep his identity and value through all those trials and that he experienced. So hope is born of faith. And throughout Joseph's story, we can see his faith continually moving him forward.
Well, what strikes me isn't that Joseph survived, it's that he developed. And he didn't allow the adversity that you just mentioned to shrink him. Rather, it refined him. I think that that's where this story of Joseph really moves from inspiring to uncomfortable. Because think about this, if suffering alone made us stronger, then we'd probably all be saints by now. But pain doesn't automatically produce character. I want to think about that for just a minute. Pain doesn't automatically produce character, but it does have the tendency to reveal it. And Joseph just kept doing the next right thing in small, maybe even unseen places. And that's, I think, going to be a key later on. So before the palace came the prison, and before leadership came obscurity. His integrity wasn't proven in power, it was often proven in private. And that's really important to think about when we talk about forgiveness, because forgiveness sounds noble in theory, but when the hurt is real, when it alters your sense of safety, forgiveness can feel impossible. So I want to ask this question directly. What makes forgiveness so difficult when the hurt has been real?
Emotional and spiritual pain is not visible to the human eye. Um, and when we think about physical damage to our body, we know that they leave scars behind. That scar tissue is visible on the skin, and or if it's internal, there are actually scars that can be seen through medical testing. Uh, but emotional damage, the havoc that that creates is with our self-image and our ability to trust. We no longer feel safe or loved, and our initial response is gonna be that fight, flight, or freeze. Now, those are natural responses to any kind of danger, whether that's physical, emotional, mental, spiritual. But with physical danger, those responses help us. We can run, we can climb a tree. Um, but with emotional danger and pain, there is no place to run. There's the flight, and we can't. The pain stays tucked inside our minds, and it goes wherever we go. We ruminate about it, and we don't have control, which is the fight instinct, over the person or the thing that's hurting us. Now, we can try revenge, of course, but that just ramps everything up for more hurt that's going to follow eventually. And then we can become emotionally numb. And there's the freeze. With that numbness comes the inability to trust others. Depression and anxiety follow as we start to feel alone in the world. And it honestly becomes a rabbit hole that goes on forever. And it can become a hurt that will never heal.
I really appreciate about, what you're saying, that forgiveness doesn't deny the damage that was done, but it just reassigns that responsibility. And that shift really is just everything. When we refuse to forgive, we maybe unknowingly stay emotionally tethered to the person or thing or whatever that hurt us. Um, I know I have personally felt this almost attachment to the lack of forgiveness. And really what I think we we are really thinking about is that attachment to the bitterness that we have. And it can become almost an obsession, right? We replay it, we rehearse it, we build arguments in our head. And, all the while we think we're protecting ourselves. Or maybe we're, you know, kind of just seeking that validation as we tell the story to other people that, by reciting and recounting our pain that, we're validated in feeling that way. But we're actually just prolonging the injury.
That's absolutely right. Because in effect, what we're doing is we're picking at the wound. Like if it was physical and you had a wound and every day you pulled the scab off of that thing. So in a sense, when we're reopening and picking at that wound, it just makes it bigger and eventually the infection can be harder to heal.
So here's a thought to consider. If we each think about an area in our lives where we need to forgive, maybe right now, we can consider this. Forgiveness doesn't say that the thing that happened didn't matter. It says it mattered, but it will not master me. And Joseph's brothers didn't deserve immediate reconciliation. I think that's something that the good majority of people would agree with. But Joseph had already done the internal work before they ever showed up in Egypt, and that is freedom. Instead of asking, do they deserve my forgiveness, or thinking that they don't deserve my forgiveness, we can try asking ourselves, what is the lack of forgiveness costing me? Is it costing me peace? Is it costing me sleep? Is it costing me clarity of thought? You were talking about that rumination, and sometimes it can just become that obsessive cycle that we play over and over again in our head. Is it costing me future relationships? Forgiveness is often less about them. More often than not, it's less about them and more about refusing to carry that poison inside of us forward. So, small shifts, small steps in our thought patterns, in catching that rumination, in surrendering it, that's really where the healing begins. So let's think, maybe, how does forgiveness liberate the one who offers it?
Well, there's a really wonderful talk that was given by Kristen M. Yee that explains this very well. And the talk was called Beauty for Ashes, the healing path of forgiveness. And she reminds us that Jesus Christ atoned for all sins, and that includes the sins that are committed against us by others. And therefore, their actions become something between him and them. We're no longer a judge in that case. So it's kind of like getting bit by a snake. We do ourselves harm by chasing it down to kill it because our job is really to heal from the hurt that was inflicted on us. And with emotional and spiritual pain, we know that we need God's strengthening power and guidance. I think that's why spirituality plays such a key role um, in forgiveness and in happiness. But there's this quote that I really like from Richard G. Scott that says, "You cannot erase what's been done, but you can forgive." Forgiveness heals terrible, tragic wounds, for it allows the love of God to purge your heart and mind of the poison of hate. It cleanses your consciousness of the desire for revenge. and it makes place for the purifying, healing, restoring love of the Lord. And isn't that what we really want anyway? Don't we want to be healed and whole and happy?
I love that, and I think that that is the goal, um, and it's trying to have that mind shift away from the pain that we've grown so attached to because we do want to be whole. I we enjoy feeling happy. And so I think what I take from that is that forgiveness really does require strength. It really, really does. Um, but I want to also kind of shift a little bit and talk about family healing because that requires a little something deeper. When Joseph reveals himself to his brothers, he reframes the entire narrative. So, what role does humility play in family healing?
Well, right off the bat, I want to validate what you just said. Um, because a lot of times in families, we're put in roles that we just don't think are fair. I've worked with a lot of kids who were parentified, we called them. In other words, a mom and dad were not capable of parenting. And so this child, you know, rather than feeling gratitude, that they had the strength to do it, they feel abused because, they had to step up. But let's go back and talk in Genesis 45. We can read Joseph's response as he forgave his brothers with these words. Now, therefore, be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves, that ye sold me hither. For God did send me before you to preserve life. So now it was not you that sent me hither, but God. And if we think about Christ on the cross, when he entreated in Luke 23, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. So I think it takes great humility to be able to see some divine and instructive purpose in our sufferings. In Isaiah 61, tells us that Christ was sent to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, and to set at liberty them that are bound. And I think that applies especially to the inner wounds that we carry around that bind us. So our ability to forgive is not dependent at all on the other person's ability to repent. Our agency gives us the power to forgive so that we can be healed. It doesn't fix or erase the behavior of the offender. We don't have to, nor should we, continue any relationship that is harmful or abusive. And many times it will be necessary to put protective boundaries in place with family members.
I think that's really important to recognize that if we have faith and if we do trust in God's plan, looking back at situations in our life where we felt hurt, betrayed, wronged by somebody else, um, I think there's a difference between, I know I've felt this in my own life, between the rumination that occurs and the destructive poison of recalling the harm, the pain. But there is also when we are able to make the shift and if we can recognize the personal growth that we've had from those trials and those times in our life, oftentimes we wouldn't trade that growth for never having to have experienced that. And it's a beautiful, you know, juxtaposition there where you have the pain, but the growth wouldn't have happened. And I think in a way that's the gift that Heavenly Father gives us as a result of what we've gone through. And I'm not trying to trivialize some truly, you know, painful or, abuse. I but I am saying those moments in our life where we feel so attached to that bitterness, it can be helpful to just shift and say, I can look at this memory as something that actually showed my character, showed my strength. Um, and then we can start on that path to healing. So, how do we rebuild trust then when relationships have been damaged?
Well, I think it's gotta be very clear that rebuilding trust, is totally on the shoulders of the offender. Because if, and that's a big if the offended party is open to the idea of continuing a relationship, the offender must respect the hurt party's boundaries. They have to be transparent and honest in their efforts to prove a change in the hurtful behavior. Because trust absolutely cannot be built if there isn't a change in the offender's behavior. Not just their behavior, but in their intention. I mean, they need to make a real heartfelt change in their life in order to rebuild the trust with someone else.
And so I think there's an important lesson for us in that too, if we have been the offender. Part of that process is the reconciliation and what will it take to make this right? And respecting that the other party has to go through their process as well, and that may take time.
It will take time.
It will
Trust
take time.
trust can be lost in a moment, but it may take a lifetime to build.
So what does it mean then to choose peace over proving a point?
Well, that's kind of a tricky question because there are a lot of peaceful relationships out there that are not happy or healthy. So if we're stuffing our hurt just to keep the peace, that doesn't mean we're forgiving or healing. We're just going numb. But if you mean, kind of letting those inconsequential things slide rather than escalating them, well, I think that it many times is a really good idea. And I think that is reflected in what Joseph and Christ said. In light of the long term good that was accomplished through their suffering seemed inconsequential. They saw a higher purpose, and they had the power to rebuff any further abuse from their offenders. For most of us, though, that probably looks like growing that inner strength, and that helps us to be secure in our own worth. We can do hard things and endure unbelievable amounts of physical and emotional pain if we see a purpose or a greater good in it. Many people do stay in unhappy relationships in order to provide for their children. Soldiers go to war, to battle, to protect their homes and families. Sometimes we stay in jobs that we don't really enjoy because it is the thing that provides for our homes and families. And I think there's a certain peace that comes in knowing that our discomfort and displeasure has a purpose.
And I think if I were to name that, I would say that's humility. Humility to me is the ability to see a story that's bigger than our pain, not minimizing it and not spiritualizing abuse, okay, but recognizing that our suffering is not the final author of our life. Joseph didn't excuse his brothers. He positioned his pain inside a greater purpose. So that doesn't mean that reconciliation is automatic. And like you said, that doesn't mean that trust is going to be rebuilt overnight. And it certainly doesn't mean staying in harm's way.
Mhm.
But humility allows us to loosen our grip on needing to be right, vindicated, or even understood perfectly. And in families, that grip is often what keeps the wound open. So choosing peace over proving a point isn't about silencing truth. It's about asking this: is winning this argument worth losing this relationship? And sometimes the most mature move is letting something small stay small. So as we close today, I want to think about this. Joseph's story isn't just about survival. It's about identity that remained intact under pressure. It's about forgiveness that frees the wounded. It's about humility that reframes the pain. It's about boundaries that protect the healing. That's really important. Those boundaries are in place so that we can get through the healing process. And it's about choosing peace without pretending that the hurt didn't happen. We've talked about this often. We don't control others' choices and we can't control what they do to us, but we do control who we become because of it. And maybe that's the real invitation of Joseph's story. Not that we will be able to avoid all suffering and not to deny when there's been betrayal, but to make small, steady choices, integrity in private, surrender instead of rumination, humility over pride. That's what shapes us into people who are not defined by what has happened to us. If you'd like to learn more about this podcast, be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We'd love to hear from you. Your input helps shape the conversation and makes perspective and potential even more impactful. We're Gwen and Abby, and you've been listening to Perspective and Potential. Until next time, keep exploring new perspectives, and remember that every small change can lead to something big. Food for thought.
Bon appetit.